Santa Claus dates back to a saint who was born about 1700 years ago in Asia Minor. His name was Nicholas, and he grew up to be a compassionate and religious young man. Nicholas's parents died when he was still young, and they left him a large amount of money. He made up his mind to use his wealth to help others and to devote his life to the service of God. As he traveled from country to country in the region around Asia Minor, Nicholas helped people in need. Later in his life, he settled in a town near the sea called Myra and became a bishop there. He was made a saint after his death for his good deeds. Saint Nicholas was especially famous as a patron saint of sailors and children. So how did Saint Nicholas of Asia Minor become the Santa Claus that we see at Christmas? Saint Nicholas is said to have died in the middle of the 4th century on December 6th, a date which later became a holiday called Saint Nicholas Day. The story of Saint Nicholas slowly spread across Europe after his death, and people in several different countries began to celebrate this holiday. It was a day for giving presents to others. Holland, a nation that became powerful through its sea trade, placed great importance on celebrating St. Nicholas Day. In the 17th century, Dutch people started to immigrate to America. At that time, most Dutch immigrants lived in the town of New Amsterdam, which is now New York. The Dutch in New Amsterdam celebrated St. Nicholas Day in the same way as they had done back in their home country. In this way, the tradition of giving presents on that day also became a custom in America. In fact, the name Santa Claus comes from the Dutch Sinterklaas, meaning Saint Nicholas. Now listen to Part 3. It took a little longer for Saint Nicholas, the stern bishop with a tall pointed hat on his head and riding on a horse, to become the jolly Santa Claus we know today. In 1822, Clement Moore, a school teacher in New York, wrote a famous poem called A Visit from St. Nicholas. This poem described an image of a different St. Nicholas who visited children on the night before Christmas. "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. A miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick. Down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly." This poem does not present an image of a religious St. Nicholas. Instead, it introduces a fat and jolly little old man riding in a sleigh pulled by reindeer. Moore described this character very vividly, as if he had seen him in real life. A Visit from St. Nicholas was published as a picture storybook and read by many people in the United States in those days. Moore's St. Nicholas was drawn as an elf in the storybook, but in the 1930s, the image of Santa Claus changed again. This time, he looked like somebody's grandfather smiling in an advertisement for a soft drink. This was how the Santa Claus we are familiar with today was born. Now listen to Part 4. As a child, you must have wondered, is there a Santa Claus? About 100 years ago, an 8-year-old girl named Virginia asked the same question in a letter sent to the New York Sun. In answer to the little girl's question, Francis Church, a newspaper editor, wrote an article in the Sun. "Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist. Nobody sees Santa Claus, but that is not a sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that neither children nor adults can see. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not, but that's not proof that they are not there. No Santa Claus? Thank God he lives and lives forever. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, no, 10 times 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make the hearts of children glad. Church's message was that the most important things in life cannot be seen with our eyes. We cannot see love, but it exists. We cannot see kindness, but people smile when it is shown. Although the images of Santa Claus have changed through history and through different cultures, what Santa Claus symbolizes has remained the same. It is the spirit of goodwill to others. Anyone with that spirit can be a true Santa Claus.
Now listen to part 1. Vampire bats, in spite of their bad reputation, are in fact highly social animals, at least to each other. They do, it is true, get their food in a way that is pretty shocking to us, by drinking the blood of larger mammals. They fly down and land, for example, on a leg of a horse, and make a small cut about 3 millimeters long in the back of the leg. Then they take a drink of blood. They drink it by moving their tongues in and out of the cut. After only 15 minutes of feeding, a bat may have taken in blood equal to 40% of its own body weight. This is a large amount for the bat, but very small for the horse. It may simply stamp its foot as though the bat were no more troublesome than a fly. After taking this relatively small quantity of blood, the vampire bat flies off, leaving only a very small hole in its victim's skin. But it is this unusual way of getting its food — most bats feed on insects or fruits, not blood — that also makes the vampires unusual in their social behavior. Now listen to part 2. Many species of bats stay together in large groups during the day. They do this to stay warm, or sometimes just because a particular cave happens to be dry and safe. They all have the same idea as to what makes up a good gathering place. Vampire bats, however, have another reason for staying together. They are not always lucky in finding food. There will be some nights when an individual flies out and fails to find any large animal to feed on. It is soon in serious danger of dying of hunger. What is remarkable about vampire bats is that in such circumstances, the bats will feed each other. A bat that has been lucky and has had a good meal that night will come back to the cave and give some of the blood it has taken to a hungry one. The bats seem to know which of their companions are in need of food, but they do not feed just any bat that happens to be hungry. They choose to feed relatives, such as their mothers and daughters, and they also pick out particular unrelated individuals that fed them in the past. They do not feed bats they do not know, nor do they feed every member of their own colony. Of course, to give food to young members is not at all an unusual thing among animals. Many species feed their young, often at a great cost to themselves. But to feed a completely unrelated individual, as these bats do, is almost unheard of. What possible benefit could the feeder bat get from saving another bat from hunger? Are animals unselfish after all? Now listen to part 3. Gerald Wilkinson, a professor of biology at the University of Maryland, decided to find out what was going on among the vampire bats. He spent many hours looking closely inside the trees where vampire bats were gathering. He also set up a colony at the University of Maryland so that he could keep a closer watch on particular individuals and which bats they fed and were fed by. Wilkinson noticed that sometimes one bat would do the feeding and at other times it would be fed by the others. And it was this difference that gave him a clue as to what was going on. His studies on wild bats showed him that getting, or missing, a meal on a particular night was largely a matter of chance. It was not that some bats were especially good at finding animals to feed on and always came back full, while others always failed to find anything. On the contrary, on some nights some bats were lucky and others were not, though the situation could be completely reversed a few nights later. This meant that there were plenty of chances for the bats to feed each other. On one night a bat might give its food to another, and a few nights later it could be paid back. So when one bat gave a blood meal to a companion that had not eaten for some time, it was not benefiting itself in any way at that moment. What the feeder was likely to get would only become clear sometime in the future. Now listen to Part 4. After having studied them for a while, Wilkinson found that bats preferred to feed starving bats that had fed them in the past. They remembered which bats had been kind to them when they themselves had been down on their luck, and those were the ones to which they had given a life-saving meal. They did not feed bats that had not helped them in the past. By keeping strong relationships with certain friendly individuals, the bats guarded themselves against the uncertainties of their peculiar feeding habits. Any bat in the colony, even the best one at getting food, could at any time find itself unable to find enough food. Therefore, they all benefited from giving their food when they could and feeding their companions when they needed it. Any bat that tried to cheat the system and take food when it was hungry and never give anything back would, in the long run, be punished. The bat that cheated might benefit once, but the next time it was starving, the others would not feed it, and the result could be death. Feeding another bat when it has plenty to give is the vampire's insurance against harder times in the future. The old saying, "Keep your friendships in good repair," has a harsh reality for these animals that would not be able to survive by themselves.
Now, listen to Part 1. One day in the late 1960s, Paul McCartney was driving his car to see his friend's son. Paul's friend John Lennon was going to divorce his wife. John's young son, Julian, was greatly saddened by his parents' separation. Paul was very fond of Julian and wanted to have a heart-to-heart talk with the boy whose nickname was Jules. While he was driving, a song started to form in Paul's mind. He began to sing, "Hey Jules, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better." As Paul developed the song, Jules was later changed to Jude. And so was born the classic pop song, "Hey Jude." This song had the power to change the world in a way the Beatles could not have imagined. In 1968, the same year that this song was born, Czechoslovakia was facing a crisis. After several decades of oppression by the Communist Party, a forward-thinking leader came to power in Czechoslovakia in January of 1968. He made some positive changes and gave the people more freedom during this time. It was called Prague Spring. This season only lasted for a short time until August of that same year, when Soviet tanks suddenly crossed the Czechoslovakian border. Now, listen to Part 2. In Czechoslovakia at this time, there was a popular singer named Marta Kubišová. Music had been a part of her life from an early age. At the age of 18, she entered a singing competition for a theater and won. Her career as a singer began. It was not long before Marta gained fame as a singer in Czechoslovakia. Marta was 27 when Soviet tanks invaded Czechoslovakia. Many citizens were arrested, and many others were killed during the invasion. As they hid from the tanks, people listened to the last message from the state radio, with the sound of guns from the Soviet army in the background. "Everyone, we will be shut down very soon, but this country is ours. We shall surely win back our country in the end." Marta could not stand seeing a foreign army in her country. Soon after the invasion, Marta began to protest in the only way she knew how, through music. She started recording songs to give people hope for a brighter future and to stress the importance of nonviolence. In fact, Marta's protest came with a big risk. The new government, supported by the Soviet Union, began to oppress the people, especially artists and writers who had the power to fight them through their works and ideas. If they acted against the government, they were forced to leave the country. Marta did not give in. Instead, she resisted by continuing to record her songs. Now, listen to part 3. One day, she heard a new song on a Western radio station. That song was the Beatles' Hey Jude. Upon hearing the song, Marta decided to remake it with new lyrics as a message of protest against the Soviet Union and the new government. In her song, she used the name Jude, which is a girl's name in the Czech language, and through her lyrics, Marta sent a message that only people of her country could understand. Hey Jude, life is marvelous, but it can sometimes become cruel. Nevertheless, you should remain positive. A few months later, she released a new album which had this song on it. In a short time, Marta's Hey Jude became an anthem of hope for millions of Czechoslovakians yearning for freedom. The government feared the influence of Marta's songs on the public, so they banned her from singing in public in 1970. Stores were forced to stop selling her albums, and it was against the law even to own any of her records. One day, Marta watched in horror as her records were smashed on the street by the state police. Even records buried in the ground by fans were dug up by the police and destroyed. With the loss of her music career, she had to survive by doing different jobs. She was arrested and questioned many times by the police about her activities. Her old fans and supporters disappeared, and her songs were no longer heard. It was a very hard time for her, but she never gave up believing in her country. Now, listen to part 4. 2 decades later, in 1989, the spirit of democracy spread to Czechoslovakia when the Berlin Wall came down. The people knew the day of freedom was drawing closer. They had been longing for freedom, but they did not want it through violence. A protest movement led by university students was spreading, and their tactics were the power of words and the human voice. One day, Marta, now 46, was visited by several university students who supported liberalization. They wanted her to sing at one of their meetings to encourage the other students. At first, she thought that they would ask her to sing the Czechoslovakian national anthem, so she was surprised when she heard their request. Marta's Hey Jude. She had not sung this song for over 20 years, and was not sure that she would be able to remember it. The students smiled at her and said, "It's all right. We remember the lines." Their words lifted her spirits. As she sang, more and more of the students started to join her. It was as if they were in a concert hall. In the weeks that followed, the students carried out many protests with Marta's Hey Jude as their anthem. The movement spread through the country and helped to end the oppression of Czechoslovakia. At the end of 1989, it became a free country again. At a rally celebrating their freedom, Marta stood before an audience of thousands and opened her arms wide to them. She began to sing in a strong voice that echoed through the large hall. There was nothing in her peaceful expression that suggested the difficulties of her past experiences. She appeared to be filled only with pride and dignity. Her singing of Hey Jude brought back memories to many people in the hall. They remembered how the song had given them the courage to overcome their many difficulties during the years of oppression. Now everyone was singing Marta's Hey Jude with her. A song originally meant to cheer up a broken-hearted English boy took on a new meaning that gave hope to millions of Czechoslovakians. Hey Jude, you have a wonderful song. If everyone sings it, your eyes will be bright. And once you start to sing it, everyone will listen. Your song gives life to our dreams.